So can you tell us a little bit about your art and what you like to make?
So I've been painting murals for about 10 years now, which is, it sounds crazy to say because 10 years feels like it's a long time but a short amount of time at the same time. But my studio work includes sculpture and also installation art. For murals in general, I think actually for my own personal art and public art, I definitely feel a sense of social responsibility, you know, because it's not every day that artists get to broadcast their work in like forms of billboards, essentially. And growing up, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of example for what someone like me looked like making art in that scale. And so for me, public art goes hand in hand with social responsibility. And so anything that I put out there in the world, in the wild, I definitely like to take great intent in the work, and oftentimes it's rooted in storytelling. It's inspired by what's around, and also, yeah, my personal experience. You know, a lot of it is infused in that, and so that's where my muralism has taken me. I have so much to learn still, and yeah, apart from actually making art, I also am a curator and a creative producer. So like Bernie said, I co-own 1810 Gallery with my partner and now husband. Yeah, you know, we started 1810 Gallery in 2015, and I could share a little bit more about that journey later. But yeah, essentially, I also just started another position, which is a creative producer position for this arts agency called Lunar Soul Studios. And we leverage the transformative power of art to essentially create social impact campaigns. So that is anywhere from billboards across the nation to doing stuff right across from the UN headquarters in New York. We took over this Four Freedoms Park where we added a bunch of Iranian artists to, basically it was for the Women Life Freedom campaign, and with that art campaign we were able to remove the Islamic Republic of Iran off of the Commission on the Status of Women in the UN. So these are things that I dabble in. But yeah, you know, for the longest time I always felt like, you know, the artist me and the organizer me were like two separate entities, two different people, you know, because they always say like your right brain and your left brain, like if you're artistic you lean towards one area. But you know, as I've gotten more experience in my career and as more years I've gotten in my life too, I definitely feel like both of those are art forms together, you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm learning to really love the language of organizing and producing and help that feed my creative process as well.
I think that's a wonderful segue into my next question, which is regarding 1810 and your position now. How long have you been like in the art business? You know, like considering yourself an entrepreneur, like when did that start, and like how many years do you think it's been?
Oof, yeah, I mean, definitely a decade now, but I will say, so when I started, let me take you guys back to like college, right? I graduated from Sac State with a degree in fine art, but I started off as a business major, which I'm like, that would have been handy now, you know? But, you know, I switched my major, graduated with art, and right around that time I met my partner, Sean Berner, and he really was the example of what it looked like in practice to like actually make money off of your art. It was something that I always thought in theory would be so nice, you know, but jumping into it, it was a lot of work, like getting into the arts out here. But luckily, you know, my partner definitely put me on to all of the projects that he was on at the time. And I wasn't actively seeking commissions at the time, but we were able to work together, and through him I learned how the process is, you know. So I would say like in my early 20s, that's when I was really like doing a lot of the groundwork, the foundational work for my career. But also we were really scrappy. Like Right? You know, sometimes I'll be like, Sean, do you remember when our rent was like $300? And that was, you know, that afforded me the ability to basically just get by. And then it wasn't until 2015 that we actually started 1810 Gallery. So he got this opportunity to start a gallery at the Warehouse Artist Lofts. This was through Ali Youssefi, who was an incredible developer who was passed on. But Sean basically started this gallery with another artist, John Horton, and you know, they started doing shows once a month, and I jumped in as support. And you know, when you're in that space, when you're selling art and just doing business, you gotta have a separate bank account and you gotta have a BOT like to work in the city. So that's when we started our partnership. And then when we really formalized into an LLC, it was in 2020 when the stakes were higher because we actually landed that gig with the city. So I hope that answers your question.
That's many years in between, I think, is the biggest lesson there.
Definitely, definitely. And you know, the higher stakes there are, you know, we formed the LLC because for one, so you guys are familiar with LLCs, right?
We can talk about it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the important part was to keep the liability away from us personally. So when you form an LLC, you pretty much create a legal entity in and of itself. And basically that entity is liable for any of your debts. If you ever get sued, that is what is liable versus you yourself. So they can't come after your home, things like that. And you know, it's also really nice to have LLC after your fictitious business name or DBA. I definitely think that, you know, partners, potential collaborators, folks that want to invest in you, look at that and they're like, oh, okay, they took the extra step to really formalize their business. That's what's up. Like, they're reliable, you know, so.
Yeah. That extra assurance, I guess, for your partners of like, you know what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
On a more casual note, do you have like a specific routine for yourself? Because you guys do a lot of business on the back end, right? Like, it's not just what we see on Instagram and all the projects that you guys are doing. But is there like, do you have advice, I should say, for the artists in the room for what kind of routine you like to set for yourself in business?
Yeah, so being an entrepreneur and an artist, you're balancing a bunch of different things, right? So there's your art practice, there's also the business practice where you're responding to emails, you're bookkeeping, you're looking at grants, applying to grants, you're writing about yourself, you're also your social media manager, your marketer. You know, there's so many hats that you wear. Just as far as the administrative side, you also have to read contracts, which sometimes are like 26 pages long, which was our contract. But
But we talked about it.
That's what I'm saying. Donald's great. But yeah, I think as far as carving out time to do all of those things, it's really a practice. You definitely have to block time out in order to do those things. You know, I think asking for help is really important as well. Like, we hired a CPA because the tax stuff was just so overwhelming. And you know, you want to make the bang for your buck. So we hired a CPA who guided us through the process of taxes. But as far as like advice, I would just say,
or tools, you know, I would say like hiring a CPA is like a tool. That you need to be, you need to have the funds for that, which is a privilege in and of itself. But like, that's a tool, right? Yeah,
I was a very like analog girl for a really long time. Like, my to-do list, I would like write the square and like, you know, but I got into Google Workspace. Like, all my spreadsheets are in one place. They're categorized by project. What else? Notion is a really good project management tool as well. If you're not familiar with it, it's, you know, you can work cross-platform with it. I really, for me, my day looks like, what are the top 3 things that are my priorities that I can knock out today. And that's just, I'll have the top 3 and then the other stuff that is like the brain dump of like respond to this person, yada yada, So just having kind of like a short list doesn't overwhelm you, and those are 3 things that you can definitely get to. I like to carve out my time where from 9 to noon I'm working on computer work, writing, answering emails, doing all that stuff. And then I have my creativity time from like 12 to 6, and then I'm eating dinner and working till like 10 again because I'm crazy. But
I'm sensing a pattern here where like mornings are when our brains are on.
Definitely.
And then like around noontime is when the ADHD hits.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit from that and talking about art, your projects, what are the various ways you earn income through art? So you can just list them out.
Yeah, so the majority would definitely come from commissions. So that's both with murals, and that's sometimes public art or private, and also just like general commissions of painting. So that's also with organizations, cultural organizations, sometimes private collectors, things like that. And then I do have like an online store that I sell prints out of. But yeah, for the most part, I sell paintings out of my studio as well. But yeah, generally like a big chunk of my income comes from murals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of murals, how do you go about finding those opportunities? So there are some tools that I'm familiar with, like Cafe.
Yeah.
But what are some other things that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's a good one. I actually follow a few different folks on Instagram that only post like mural opportunities with the deadlines and the application link and things like that. The city of Sacramento has a really good, the Office of Arts and Culture, they do a newsletter that shows all the opportunities as well. And yeah, nowadays it's as simple as a Google search, honestly. And the ones that I am looking out for are like different cities, what kind of public art opportunities they have, because
databases from different cities, or
yeah. Or a lot of the times people will share with me. They'll be like, "This is a great opportunity. I think you should apply." And I have an ongoing calendar. That's another tool, is like having a calendar of like when something is due, and then having another date like a week before it's due, so you can work on it. And it's not last minute.
Yeah, it's a week prior.
That's how fast we do it.
And on that note, like, how do you decide which projects you want to pursue? Like, based on what's realistic, or like, what's your process of deciding?
Yeah, definitely. I would say like getting to know the scope of work, like the timeline, the budget, those things, if that feels right to you. But really my number one compass is like if it aligns with my values, I've spent a good chunk of my career just saying yes to everything, and now I'm finally able to like be at this point where I could be a little bit more discerning. So I'm still trying to sharpen that tool of like, okay, what feels right, you know what I mean? And I think it's different for everybody, but things that call to my heart are definitely more like partnering with cultural organizations, for one. Just things that can make a really big impact. Those are the things that I align with and look for.
5? Okay.
Yeah, this is last question, so that's perfect. How do you ensure, to all the artists in the room, which I think all of us are artists in this room, how do you ensure that you're being valued as an artist? Because you mentioned like earlier in your career, you said yes to a lot of opportunities. I'm sensing that's a pattern with a lot of us. And when you're building out that resume, I'm definitely like, I agree, that we all make those decisions based on what we think is right. But how do you ensure that you're valued as an artist?
It all goes into my proposal. So the way I build out my proposals, I do an introduction of myself. I also show some work samples. So there's case studies of the kind of work that I've done, plus the attached budget sometimes. And then the huge part of it is really, I create an itemized budget for everything. So people see, and I give them a timeline as well of like, this is how much time this takes. And, you know, the money is one thing. Like, you could see the administrative and just like project management fee as a line item there, separate from the artist design fee and the labor. You know, these are things that I like to use my estimate or budget spreadsheet just as a way to kind of advocate for myself, but also educate my client of like what things really cost. And yeah, and then I also have a list of deliverables, like what you get with this. So yeah, I hope that answers.
No, yeah, that's a perfect answer. Thank you for that. And thank you for all of your awesome responses. I'd like to pivot to asking Donald about how artists are chosen for these projects. So you can talk about this specific project with Sean and Frankie, or you can talk about, you know, just in general, how do you guys choose artists for the city?
Sure. Yeah, so just generally, I think I touched base on a little bit at the intro. For the most part, the vast majority of all of our opportunities are a request for qualifications that will come out on our newsletter, and then you apply through the portal we use is called Submittable, but it's very similar to Cafe. And it's all done online. That way we're able to review these submissions. We always set a submission deadline, and I always will have an information session for each project opportunity. So I really encourage people to come and check out those information sessions. If you're not able to make it, we always record it. And so you can, there's always an information packet as well that you can just get through the request for qualifications background information, and you can go there and you can watch the recording. So I definitely encourage that. The other thing I would say, how the projects come out is occasionally we will have some smaller projects where maybe there may be a group of artists that are invited because they were working on another project. So sometimes things happen like that, and that's why it's also a great benefit to apply and be part of some of the projects that we have, because sometimes they can lead to other projects in the future. Lastly, I'd say that we as a city, we take very seriously the fact that we're stewards of public dollars. Even if we get money from a grant or other areas and not the 2%, it's still public dollars. We're still working as a local government agency. And so our selection process is as transparent and open as we can make it, and that's really an important part of what we do. We take a lot of time to form panels that are both diverse culturally and professionally, and that we really require these panelists to review a very detailed rubric in their decision-making process so that we can try to make that process as objective as possible. I always recognize there's some amount of subjectivity, and that's why we have folks from different backgrounds that are able to offer some of their own personal insights to one another as a panel. So that's a really critical part, and something that not everybody is doing or even required to do, right? So local nonprofits may not be required to do that, or other groups, certainly not private developers, but sometimes they feel that they want to. And we always encourage that. We encourage the opportunity to have a panel review the work and let people know that there's a process of review that you're really looking through to make your selection.
When you select the artist, what is your process with working with them? So like, how hands-on are you? And just like the details of the actual project.
So I'm pretty hands-on, I will say, just because, I very much believe that I want the artist to drive their project. So I try not to create projects where, there's occasionally public art projects where somebody like, I need this and it needs to be this. We really want to work with the artist, like through that process when possible. We want to come in early and allow the artists to kind of develop their concept around the space. That's also part of the reason why we do a request for qualifications and not a request for proposal often, because we want to bring the artist in and allow the artist to be part of that planning. So that is a really vital part of the process. We also think that, engagement with stakeholders and with community members is not just, and we're going to chat about this a little bit today, it's not just like a box that you check off. It literally helps you it informs you on how the project can develop. And there's not just one way to do it. Right? You can be creative in how you're engaging both community members or stakeholders, or even working, with different artist groups.
That's wonderful. And I wanted to ask about the budget. I feel like there's really no graceful segue into talking about money.
Yeah.
But you mentioned various projects, like varying sizes, varying scales. So what determines what an artist gets paid through the city?
Absolutely. So, and I think this is a very important aspect of the commission work that we do. We don't always have the same amount of funds. And so a lot of times, Frankie was talking about this, at times she was kind of like whatever projects they could get, they would accept those. And as you start to kind of build more experience, maybe you can kind of turn some things down, or maybe you don't apply for some things. I think that's the right approach to build up your portfolio. I definitely never kind of take the stance of, oh yeah, the artist can do it for exposure like that. I heard that so much myself, years ago. And I also heard years ago, artists were often asked to do even sketches and drawn proposals for no money, right? It was just here, put your proposal out there. And so I would not advocate for that, and if you're an artist, I would not actually advocate that you even apply for those opportunities. Unless you feel really strongly about it, then you go for it. But I think that artists need to be paid for the work they do, just like any other professional, just like anybody else working. If you develop a design, you should be paid for that. So that payment may depend on the budget that's available, and I think that's reasonable. I also think that sometimes the budget just is the way we can put the opportunity out there. So some are higher and some are not as high. And if you don't feel like that's enough compensation, then maybe that's not the project that you should be applying for. If you need some more opportunities, then maybe you apply for that and that helps you build. You've got to make that personal choice. You should know that we are fighting for you to get as much funds as we can to the artist, but there's always a limit. The last thing I would say, and I actually just wanted to make sure to touch upon this because I love that you brought up the itemized budget. And we talked about this a little bit. This is key. Folks, especially if you're working with private individuals, sometimes they just have no idea. Artist and magician are at the exact same level for half the people. It's the same thing. And I have some friends laughing here, but because you feel me, right? They don't know how you do this. They just think that you just one day you just created all of this. And then here you are showing it to them, right? They don't understand the time that you take for project management, the time that you take for this, the cost of insurance and all that. So itemize it, put it down. Sometimes if you get that commission, or even before, you can say, hey, listen, this is, especially for private organizations or people, you could say, hey, I know this is what your budget is, but I really would love to do this project with you. Let me just show you how this breaks down. And this is why I'd like to advocate for some additional, and sometimes, because you broke it down, they say, oh, you know what? Actually, if that's what this is for, I have some additional funds that we could put towards it because I didn't realize community engagement takes time and money. But if we call it community engagement, which it is, then I'm able to access this other pot of funds or whatever. I'm making stuff up, but things that have actually happened in real life. So sometimes you just have to define for people what it is that why you need those funds and how those funds will assist in the project. And sometimes you got to be prepared for them to say, I'm sorry, that's all I got. And then you'll just have to make a decision as a professional, like, do I take on that project?
And for projects that you do end up taking on where you feel like their budget isn't 100% there, I still go with my itemized budget, but I write how much I discounted off of the budget. So they see it. They see the value, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a fantastic point to make. Just as far as advocating for yourself and defining your value, because I think a lot of artists struggle to do that. And we, in our struggle, we perpetuate this kind of approach to business. So I love that. And I love that you brought up insurance because I wanted to ask, are there specific things that artists need in order to work with the city? So when they get, when you put in the RFQ and you put in your request for proposal and you get accepted, what are the things that they need in order to work with you?
Yeah, so so just to recap real quick, so you did this RFQ, maybe there's like 50 to 100 people that applied, you get selected as a finalist, maybe you're given some funds to then create a preliminary design, or maybe you just interview. That's often sometimes what we'll do so that the artist can really work with folks. But after that, you get the project. Right? So you were selected to do the project. And so there's a few things that we'll do right off the bat. When you're working with the city, and you'll largely do this with Amy as well, and you'll get set up as a supplier with the city, right? So that's like a tax thing. Folks, if you have to have like a legal name that you pay taxes under. It's always interesting. Sometimes I talk with artists and they've got a couple different artist names. Like, it does matter, right? And it all needs to match. So we'll talk with you about that kind of stuff. Like, your tax forms need to match your contract, need to match everything that you're doing. If you have an LLC, then don't fill out your tax forms with your name, right? You fill it out with the LLC because that's where you want the money, how you want the money to flow. But we look to you to decide that. We'll help you with that, but ultimately it's your decision as a business. So you'll get set up as a supplier. You'll do what's called a business operations tax certificate, which is the equivalent of a business license here in the city of Sacramento. Truthfully, if you're doing work in the city of Sacramento, you're supposed to have a business operations tax certificate. If you're an employee for somebody, the business probably already has it. But if you're like, have your own business, that is kind of city law, right? So you're supposed to be doing that. However, if you do work for the city, we require it, right? So whether it's monitored or not, I'm not going to get into that, but when you do work for the city, you have to have that BOTC. So we help you through that process as well. So I would encourage everybody to have the BOTC because, quite frankly, it's part of the requirements. But the supplier ID, I think, also is not entirely necessary until you receive a commission. Because this question came up, should we get this stuff ahead of time? The BOTC, yeah, you probably should if you're doing business in the city. Insurance, this is the way I feel about insurance. If you are a working artist doing public art projects, you really need general liability insurance coverage. You might as well get it to our limits because it's like $1 million like aggregate. It's pretty basic level insurance. People often get even more. But if you're not doing any projects, like there's no sense, and you may spend $2,000 or more a year on a general liability policy. I don't think there's any reason that you need to get that until you actually have a commission, at least one, right? And then utilize that first commission that you got to help pay for that year of your general liability. I mean, just recognize that right off the top, that's going to go to that. And feel good about it, right? I remember one of the very first mural projects that I did back in the early 90s was for like Parks and Recs in like the Mid-South. And like, I didn't have a projector or anything. So like, that was like half of my entire artist fee just went to like purchasing an Artograph projector that I could project on at night and all this kind of stuff. So utilize these commission opportunities to buy what you need to do the work. But you definitely do need insurance, and it'll just be a requirement in order to do business with the city. There's one caveat. Occasionally, we will create programs like Community Mural Sacramento or some other programs where we recognize artists may be hired on more of an hourly rate or a smaller project rate. And so sometimes we as a program, if we have the budget, we'll get an insurance that will cover you within that program for that programmatic work. But that's very specific to programs. That's not larger public art commissions. You'll always need your own general liability policy.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
That was really useful for me. I hope that was useful for everyone else in the room. And I wanted to pivot to asking both of you about the collaboration. But first, if you can each define the stakeholders for the Office of Arts and Culture and also for 1810, do you guys have specific stakeholders that you keep in mind for your projects?
For the project that we did together on North 12th Street, or just
because
in
you
general?
mentioned community engagement, and
Yeah.
I wanted to lead into that.
So I think specifically to North 12th Street, right?
Yeah.
There was quite a few.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about the project in general first and then get into?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I could give a little
Yeah.
overview of North 12th Street, and then actually, I think it'd be great if Frankie started to talk a little bit about how she interacted with the stakeholders. Yeah. So let me give you all an overview. This particularly is a project that, and actually I loved in your talk in how you were talking about you're oftentimes now will apply for projects that kind of are meaningful to you, that kind of are achieving some of the things that you want to do as a person and as an artist. And so we do too, right? We feel like we want to do those projects that we feel like are not only a great opportunity for the artist, but a great opportunity for the people that are going to live with the work and those stakeholder groups. And I think North 12th Street is a really nice example of that. It was an opportunity that happened in a new housing development that's now called Marisol Village. And it used to be called Dos Rios. And I'm just going to be real with you guys for a second. This came out in the 1940s. The Dos Rios, public housing community, was placed there in the 1940s in the River District. Guess what was around them? Factories. Chemical plants, the rail yards. I mean, every industrial thing that you can think of was placed around this public housing community. And as you can imagine, maybe not right at first, but at a certain point, that public housing community was mostly filled with minority folks, right? So that's a shame. It actually is egregious. It's what we would call not de facto segregation, but de jure segregation, meaning the government was complicit in that. And I'm just saying that that's a reality of what this small community was. Enter the FHA, and also HUD, the Office of Urban Development, Housing and Urban Development, from the federal government. And I'm not, I have drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, so I'll just tell you, they really came in and they said, we're not just going to build new housing, we want to help build and support the neighborhood and the community that these folks are going to be moving into. And so everybody that lived in Dos Rios had first dibs on whether they would come back when Marisol Village was built, and HUD found funds to also place them in places around the city while the construction was going on. So I'm sure there were things that weren't perfect about it. There's always issues, people learn, but I will say, and having worked with this government agency in our economic development group, I felt super good about what we were doing. This was tied to housing, and so the artwork came out of an idea that community engagement and working with neighborhoods and creating a space for this housing needs to include art and culture. And so that's where Frankie and Sean entered. That's where also another artist, Vicky Scurry, was able to do 2 large-scale gateway sculptures. But specifically, Sean and Frankie came in early on to really help get those conversations started. And I think that maybe that's a good segue for it. But it's the tie to affordable housing that for me made it really meaningful, and I think made us all feel like we weren't just coming in and putting stuff there. We were really working or doing our best to work with existing communities in that process.
Yeah.
So maybe take over?
I just want to, before I get into the project, I do want to address that, sometimes murals are used for not so good. In other words, gentrification, right? And so with this project, what we really wanted to do was the opposite of that. We wanted to create something that was celebrated and that the people in that neighborhood could relate to. So it's beyond beautification, right? And this is why we implemented so much community engagement. And honestly, the process was really long. It was from 2020, beginning of 2020 until 2022, right?
Yeah.
That the sketch process in and of itself, which included the community engagement, was about a year long.
And that was a requirement.
Yeah.
Actually, I told them, I don't want you starting on your designs, formally starting until you've had time to really work with folks.
Yeah.
And you guys jumped right in on that.
Exactly. But also it was the start of the pandemic, so there was a lot of challenges. Like how do you do community engagement that is meaningful and impactful, where you could really build relationships with these people over the screen? It was really difficult. So we had to wait and kind of do what we could with what we had. And Sean, please chime in. But yeah, essentially our stakeholders, right, for the project. And I think this was one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the biggest successes of the project. We had to work with the Sacramento Housing Redevelopment Agency, Loaves and Fishes. Well, first of all, you guys all know North 12th Street, right? 160 coming into town. So we have Loaves and Fishes along with the Mustard Seed School. And please help me fill in the blank because there's so many.
Yeah, and actually part of the work that Sean and Frankie were doing in that first year was really establishing who all the stakeholders were, right? So we got brought in by economic development here at the city, which was super exciting. Then SHRA, who was really running it, and of course the funding coming mainly from HUD. But we knew there was the Marisol Village community, and to SHRA's credit, there is an established nonprofit that works with them and helps provide resources to people there. But we still had to figure out who were all the stakeholders. Yeah. And so one of the things that also, and again with the pandemic that made it really challenging, was we had kind of planned to have this gathering, this convening with some elected officials and all kinds of other folks, and also some of the local indigenous tribes. And then the pandemic hit, but we did it anyway. And we did it online, and we did over 3 Fridays, and probably had over 75 participants each session. People came back, which was super exciting. And I remember we all learned a lot through that because we brought all these people together and they started to really establish themselves as potential stakeholders. We cast our net really wide, even to UC Davis. And they played a role. They're one of their landscape architecture classes. But we cast our net really wide, and then I think you guys were able to kind of zero in. And one of the folks, and then I'll want you to talk a little bit about that. One of the folks early on who started with us was Brett Cook, and he was actually initially selected as the artist, and Trust Your Struggle was the second selection in the panel. And Brett had some issues that happened during the pandemic. He had started some conversation around community and collaboration. And it was a really great start. Of course, Trust Your Struggle has worked with Brett for years as well. So he kind of got us started. But what came out of that was also a little bit of a conversation. When I talked with Brett at one point, and I was like, what do you think about how do you connect with stakeholders? And he's like, you know what? I just make friends. I just make friends with people. I just get to know people. And I've always taken that to heart. I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet Brett over 15 years ago in Philly. But and he's just an incredible advocate for community engagement in so many ways. But I love that simple concept of you just get to know people, and you need time and you need resources to do that. So people are always talking about community engagement like check a box, but if you don't really give yourself the time to get to know folks, you're never going to really go deep into the engagement. But maybe you want to talk a little bit about how that evolved with some of the stakeholders.
Can we take a pivot for a second? Yeah. I wanted you to talk about Trust Your Struggle, and because it seems like they fed into this project a little bit.
So actually the whole project was led by myself and my partner, but we did it with our crew. We painted the whole thing with our crew, and our crew is called Trust Your Struggle. Sean, do you want to share a little bit about Trust Your Struggle since you're a longer member than me?
Trust Your Struggle. I think we're like probably 20 years together, I think, at this point, maybe a little bit over. But it definitely was started in the Bay Area with just some artist friends who kind of got together and did an art show, and then it kind of built into this collective. We've got members in New York and in the Bay Area, LA, and probably a couple somewhere in Mexico right now. No, but it's good. And so anyways, we would do these fundraisers. We'd raise money, and then we would take trips and work with community organizations and donate murals. So we kind of raise money, and then we would meet with these folks and run workshops, and it's been a great one. Yeah, we've been able to do it like in the Philippines, Mexico, South America, through Europe.
So they worked with you guys on this 12 North Street project?
Brett Cook is a super OG, and some of the members of Trust Your Struggle, he was our high school teacher. He's been a mentor to a lot of the folks. So we've worked with him on projects in the past anyways. And so when we applied as the lead, but we applied with, I think, probably 5 of the members of Trust Your Struggle to do the mural.
And it's an interesting example. It doesn't happen that often. I mean, it happens pretty infrequently. But every once in a while, if you're a finalist, there is a chance that the person that did get selected, something happens that they can't continue for some reason. So we have scored everybody, and that is how that happened. It happened quite organically, just because it happened that Brett actually had a connection with Trust Your Struggle, so the transition felt really good. Yeah. But he really helped us set the tone, and I really enjoyed that process with him. But you guys and Trust Your Struggle as a group approached this in the way that we were hoping. That from a really grassroots community approach, recognizing, place-keeping, and that notion that we want to work with folks that live in this space, not come give something to them, but work.
And actually, Brett, when Brett got selected, we were already going to help him paint that mural. I remember we did.
Our studio's 2 blocks away from the site.
And I remember we went into the interview as one of the finalists, and we felt like we killed it. And then I saw Brett coming in next, and I was like, well, there it goes.
He literally said that. I remember you said that up in the elevators, because I was
on it.
Tipped our hat, was like, yep, you got it. Right.
For sure.
But yeah, never underestimate the opportunity when you're a finalist. You never know what's going to happen. So give it your best shot, and you never know the kind of connections that kind of come out of those opportunities. But just back to the stakeholders real quick. So that we had that online session, which I think was really helpful for you all to develop. And then do you want to talk just a little bit the Miwok tribe, and how you kind of started to work directly with them, and how that informed that piece at Loaves and Fishes, I think is an interesting anecdote.
So they actually attended the first meeting that Donald was talking about, the 3 sets of days that, we talked about the history of the area, and kind of organically, people who were really interested rose to the top, and the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indian were one of them. And honestly, they're just amazing folks. We spent a lot of time just discussing and just letting them tell their stories, and not really aiming at we didn't really have a specific vision in mind. We wanted to be conduits for their vision in a way. you know, and so we were trying to figure out how to like tie all of this history and significance of that area together. And the thing about Sacramento is that it's the confluence, right? It's traditionally it was like the meeting place for a bunch of different tribes. You've got the Nisenan, the Miwok, Maidu tribes out here, and so they shared this idea in one of our conversations about the importance of basket weaving and how basketry in their culture it's everything, and they pretty much make baskets to hold their babies in, to forage for food, to hold water in. And there's so much significance in even the patterns that go into them. They use baskets to bury their dead, you know, and that was something that we were super inspired by. And at this point, I don't even think we had like an idea of how we would tie all 7 different locations. We forgot to give you guys the full spiel, but it's like 7 different locations.
You know, and that was the thing too, is that initially I think the call was for the underpass.
Yeah.
But there were these other opportunities where we wanted to kind of tell more of a story.
Exactly.
So we reached out to Loaves and Fishes, and then a private business owner for one of the walls.
Yeah.
And we knew we were going to do something in the Mirasol Village.
Yeah.
But I remember we were playing with the idea of the metamorphosis.
Yeah.
But then we did want to tie into the history of that area. And I know I just want to point out that I think that when we had those meetings with the Miwok, initially we just wanted to see and get their blessing to even possibly paint about it.
Right.
Yeah.
From not being from their culture. Like,
Exactly.
would you guys, we want to honor you, but do you feel good about this? Can we get your blessing? And how do we make sure we represent you right? 'Cause
Yeah.
we don't, you know, this isn't our culture, and
Yeah.
we want to honor you, but how do we do that? So it was,
That
and
was it.
they were super informative, and it was good.
And you know, I'm glad you brought that up too. Like, please recognize if you find yourself in that kind of situation where you want to integrate a culture that you're not as familiar with, and you do reach out, y'all give them some time, right? I mean, don't be like, oh yeah, can you get back to me tomorrow? Because like my deadline's Friday. Yeah. You know, like there's nothing that frustrates people, and certainly a lot of our indigenous populations more than feeling like you just came in and you want a checkbox. Right, so make it meaningful. I think they felt that right from the beginning with you guys.
We had multiple meetings after to connect with them.
Yeah, and they've even told me afterwards they like how appreciative they were of that process. And so I think that's really valuable. One of the things real quick about the underpass, it did initially start with just the underpass, but when we put the call out, I told economic development, I said, I'm not really that interested in this project. We'll do it if it's just the underpass. Because you got this whole corridor, and people are going to live on that whole corridor, and Mirasol Village, like, it needs to be something wider. And so we actually were able to increase the budget and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes you just have to ask. And say this needs to be kind of an experiential, like something that goes down this entire corridor. And I think that also helped inform you guys as that metamorphosis theme happened. It seemed to happen sequentially, and North 12th Street is one way, so it literally fit like the whole kind of concept of that.
Yeah. I think also we had those Zoom meetings, and I think that, you know, sometimes, again, it's hard to really engage with folks and really get to know folks in that. But luckily, within about that year, we did end up having some in-person meetings as well.
We did.
And we were able to do workshops, and we were able to actually meet with folks.
In person, right?
Yeah. And obviously, we were doing COVID tests and making sure we
And these guys were just super creative about it. I mean, you guys had, you know, they brought people to their studio. They had the whole garage thing open. So we found different creative ways to work through those pandemic challenges. And we embraced the Zoom, and also like I said, community engagement I think can happen in so many ways. I don't think anybody should be prescriptive about it. We all may have ways that, you know, we've done it before, but just resist temptation to be too prescriptive, to say, oh, it's community engagement. I have to do this, I have to do this, and this. You know, like you guys created surveys, but then you went over and did other workshops in person, and, you know, so I think there's different ways you can approach it, and be creative with those approaches can help inform you.
I think one of the big things too that Donald touched on is, you know, not being extractive in the process. I think it's really important, especially if, you're, going into a community that you don't know much about. I think that, being just culturally responsive in your approach is really important. I think being open-minded to what they have to share, because in the process, you actually have to build trust. And that's the point about like friendship, right? Like you have to build trust with this community, even in order to get their blessing to paint about them. Does that make sense? Yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
I think because of time, I wanted to lead into the advice that you would want to give to everybody in the room, so other artists or just creatives in general.
Oh my gosh, I have a whole list of advice, but I will say, and it's something I touched on earlier, I think that artists are kind of like magicians, like there's a lot of power in being able to create art that is out there in the wild and is visible and is subject to people thinking about it and seeing it every day, and also maybe hating it, maybe loving it, like you're imprinting on folks. And I think with that, use your power for good. That's all I could say.
I would say when you're applying to some of these RFQs, is I think that how your proposal is set up and how it looks really matters. You got these panels of people that are looking through 100 submissions, 200 submissions, and I've been on a panel myself, and I think that you're trying to do diligence and look at everyone and pay attention, but when things are set up and the photos are too small or they're blurry, I think that really, like on that end, on the professional side of that, I think it really helps to take the time to really set that up nice. And then once you get that first one laid out, you can always pull from that one for the next one, and you change some things. Google Slides is great for setting up stuff, even just proposals that you're doing for private companies, you know what I mean? Also advocating for yourself on what you want to get paid. We work with quite a few art consultants that are for some big companies, and they'll come at me with we've got this much to do and we want this, and I'll say, well, it's going to be this, you know what I mean? And they'll find money. And if they can't, then maybe the scope of work changes a little bit. Right. You're like, well, I can do this for you for that price. You know what I mean?
The itemized budgets are really helpful, so you don't just have like some bottom line numbers like, oh yeah, it takes me that much.
I wanted to add to that. So put your name in the bucket, even if it feels like you're not ready for that project. Whatever you submit will help you prepare for the next submission. The more you write about your work, the more you talk about your work, the easier it is to apply to these things. And yes, documenting is so important.
And use that submission as an opportunity to help kind of, build that, have that stuff ready to go. Have the 10 slides ready to go. Maybe you're going to change them out over time, as you create work. Have that artist statement ready to go. Have a resume ready to go. Like, don't try to do it all like right before. And so that's the first thing. Second thing, and this is, find that time. If you're like a working artist and this is what you do pretty much full time, carve out a day a week that you're just going to do business stuff, or a half day a week that you got some set time. Also, I brought up this anecdote when we were chatting ahead of time, and I think it's something valuable to share. So, and I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, and I had a guy who was actually my graduate school professor, Terry Atkins, an incredible artist, but also always told me like it was, right? And so I came up to Terry, and as a colleague of his at the time, and I was like, Terry, what's going on? Like I'm trying to show at some galleries in Chelsea, or trying to do this and that. I'm just not feeling like I'm getting the opportunities. And he's like, you know what? Just make the work. Just make sure you are making the work, because your opportunities will come. If you're consistently in there making new work, your opportunities will come. The question is, are you going to be ready with the work when they do come to you? Because if you're have to scramble and put together a whole series of pieces because somebody's interested in the show, you might miss that opportunity. So don't forget, don't get so involved in the business that you forget, like, you got to put in the time in the studio, and you got to really, like, make sure that you're valuing your creative space and creating that work and being ready. I can't say that enough. Like, that is just really critical. And that also goes for, if you really want to do public art and you really want to put art out in public spaces, self-fund a small project that you do on your own, like a temporary project. Do something. Like, you could do something with materials that you have around you, document it, and then boom, now you've got a project you can share. And I guarantee you that people looking will go, well, all right, I see this person hasn't gotten that many commissions, but look at the different pieces that this artist has done kind of on their own or created their own stakeholder network to create work. And I think that would be some advice that I would give to, if you haven't done any public art, but you're interested, create a piece that's more in a public space or, even on a private property, but viewable to the public in a way like that, and document that.
I think so. I think even when I first started painting murals, 20 years ago, I went out and just asked 12 spots if I could paint a mural, and maybe one of them jumped at it, and they didn't have any money at it, But I went out and painted walls. I think that's one of those things, like, doing work for free or for yourself is okay as long as there's not somebody who is getting money is asking you to do a job for free,
right.
And that's kind of the difference right there.
Yeah. If you're intentionally making that decision, hey, I want to do this, then good for it. Go for it. Don't sit around and wait for somebody to pay you to be able to do something. But you should be valued if you are being asked to do a piece, for sure.
And but a lot of times that work turns into work. I mean, for years, it's like I would go out and paint a wall, and someone would pull up and be, hey, I need this wall painted. Yeah. And I think to speak to what you're saying is like, do work, make stuff. You know what I mean?
Make stuff.
Yeah.
The term community engagement is.
Could you start again with the mic?
The term community engagement is overutilized and underdefined quite often, and I'm really interested in your answer, Franceska. Actually. What are good pillars of quality community engagement to you? What's the integrity behind community engagement for you? I think more people could go deeper into what real or what personal or professional community engagement means, and I just love some more definition from your perspective.
I love that question so much. The first word that comes to mind would have to be intention. And that is intention when you come into the space because you're a visitor of the community. Intention when you're trying to build these relationships with folks. Again, the trust in order to get to just like the stories that they have. You know what I mean? I think intention is a really big one. And I would also say, like, you as the artist, you're a conduit for the vision. And a lot of times, like, you still are able to dictate what goes on the wall, but oftentimes you're utilizing this space, this opportunity to gather information. It's like research and development, but with your heart, that's the best way I could define it.
I think I saw Jaya, and then we'll go to Ryan.
Mine's a quick question. You mentioned earlier, but I didn't catch the name of a project management tool that you can use across platforms.
Notion. There's a little bit of a learning curve with it, but there's lots of YouTube videos. So,
Follow-up question. And this I believe is going to, okay. I know I have my own way of doing proposals, and I was like, oh, she knows a little something, something. So I consider, for instance, what you've built for yourself with how you do proposals and how you have your line item breakdown and how you have your deliverables. That's something that I consider an asset that there would be a dollar amount attached to, instead of just like a freebie, hey, here's how I do this. But do you have a document like that that would, say, be on some sort of super secret link on your online store that would have a dollar amount attached where you could check out that asset?
Honestly, I've been wanting to do some sort of proposal writing workshop. Not that I think mine are the best, but they're pretty good. Yeah, and we could talk because I know you. I could just, But yeah, I think I don't want to gatekeep that information because it's so important for our community to be versed in how to present themselves. And the basic breakdown is really like Google Slides is my best friend because it's so quick and easy to drop pictures, information, spreadsheet links, things like that. And just to give you a quick rundown of what it is, I have a cover page, bio, work samples, and I usually try to keep my proposal to like 10 slides. And then I have an overview of the wall itself. So I talk about who the client is, the size of the wall, the kind of material it is, and photos of the wall, measurements, things like that. And then I talk about just a single pager. Sometimes I'll do a mood board, or sometimes I'll even write a little actual proposal of like what is intended for the piece, just as a guiding light. And that is editable. It's like I present this as just my initial idea. Let's talk more. Am I hitting, am I checking the boxes, or do you want to take it a different direction? And then from there, I talk about the timeline of the project. So really like the full project plan for what I could foresee, like when this fits into my schedule based on their timeline as well. And then from there, we do the line item budget, stack it with a deliverable, and then a thank you. Slap it with a thank you at the end.
Got all that?
Sorry, I don't know if that was necessary, but
This is recorded.
Yeah, it'll be on YouTube.
Yeah, was the workshop. Let's connect, Frankie. Maybe we could do
yeah,
some
let's do
kind of
it.
iconic
Let's do it.
I'll sign up.
I have a question about these, like the high dollar projects that are, $250,000, $500,000. And I'm going to have Donald talk about Del Rio Trail again. I know for some of those, the high dollar projects, I feel like in the application, like one of the first sentences was something along the lines of, if you haven't received a project of this dollar amount, like, don't even bother trying, kind of thing.
Definitely not.
I swear there was something.
A little something like that.
Not
for artists who already had experience doing large commissions like that, not in the same way.
Yeah, I would never
Yeah.
phrase it like
No,
that. So let me just respond to that for
more or
unless you
less.
wanna-
So basically, if you haven't had a project like that, you're probably not going to get this project. So how do you get that experience to, how do you get one of those big jobs?
Yeah. So first of all, I write the calls. So yeah. So what you may be referring to is in the phase 2 portion of the Del Rio Trail. We definitely would have said that artists should have some experience in large-scale public art, but we wouldn't have said you won't even be considered, because I would never say something like that. What I will say is these projects that are higher commission amounts, right? $300,000, $500,000 project, and honestly, there's not the highest commission amount at Del Rio Trail was $375,000, but you do need to have some experience to understand what the steps they need to go through. And I think this goes to what I was talking about before. Either start with some smaller projects that are done on your own so that you can show what you've done, that you've done some things before. And then also get some smaller commissions under your belt so that show hey, I've worked with this group or I've worked with that. I understand how to work a budget. I'll always say you should apply. If you're a professional artist, you're over 18 or 18 or over, then you absolutely should apply. If you're qualified for that work, then you should apply. But in the rubric itself, you do benefit oftentimes from some public art experience. And so, like I said, that might happen through other commissions that you get, but it might be smaller commissions, or it might be, like self-funded projects that you still show. So that's what I would encourage you. Build up. If you don't have any experience in doing public art commissions, try to build up to show something. You should still apply for those larger items. And occasionally there are artists that have never had any experience that will do a larger commission. It does happen. So you should definitely throw your hat in the ring. But building up some experiences, because there's a lot of moving parts. Just so you know, there's permitting, there's there's budgeting, there's all the insurance and stuff like that we'll work with you, but you should have some fluency in that, especially if there's more dollars at stake. One last thing I'll add to that. We are actually looking for opportunities where we might be able, and there may be one coming up in 2025, where there are sculptures, but they'll be at a little bit lower budget amount. They're an opportunity for us to really work with those artists that maybe don't have as much public art experience. Maybe they're a sculptor, but they've done most of their stuff in their studio. And so we've been trying to find a project, and I think we do have one. I can't give you much more information about it, but smaller projects that would really help you. If you were able to apply and receive one of those, that'll help you. Plus, don't just look at Sacramento. Look at other cities and other places where you might be able to get some of that experience.
Cool, thanks. And yeah,
absolutely.
I apologize. I framed that question a little hard.
No, it's all good. I mean, I know because I wrote it. Yeah. And I definitely wouldn't want to, anybody to ever feel like they shouldn't apply. I always think you should apply.
I think that's, but to your point though, how do you get your foot in the door if a lot of these big budgets like that require you to already have that experience? And like you're saying, smaller projects, but if you're applying to them, you've never had a $300,000 gig. How do you do you work under somebody who's another sculptor?
Well, that's another
help them facilitate it, or
that's another option. Work with some other people to show that experience. At least I was an assistant on this project. You show some experience along with your studio work. I'll also say that there's an opportunity to kind of think about who could you collaborate with another person that maybe has some experience and now you're doing a collaborative project together? I think there's ways that you can get yourself going if that's the kind of work you want to do. One last thing I'll say, part of the issue also is the RFQ process. Even though that kind of feels like the fairest process for everybody, it's also part of the problem sometimes, right? Because you're just showing your past work. Right? So, many people know about Maya Lin, who was at the time a graduate student, or actually not even a graduate student in architecture, and applied and ended up doing the Vietnam Memorial, right, with her design. Right? But it was an RFP, right? So we're thinking about that. We're thinking that was a request for proposal. So she was able to put in her proposal and ultimately won this huge competition that catapulted her career. So we're thinking about that. We're trying to find ways. Right now we find that it's the fairest way is to look at people's qualifications and then pay them to do designs. But we're always looking at new ways, and like I said, keep your eyes open. We should have some opportunities for smaller public art projects where you can build some more experience.